Introduction to the book of Ezekiel. Seeing the unseen God. God showed himself to Ezekiel in earthly radiance. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. When I saw it, I fell face down, according to chapter 1, verse 28. Ezekiel was quite sure that he had seen and heard the God of the Bible. While few have been privileged to see him as Ezekiel did, this God had been speaking plainly for generations. His words were on record. Before such splendor, Ezekiel felt utterly weak and inadequate, just as Isaiah had during a similar vision in Isaiah 6. He fell on his face repeatedly, but God raised Ezekiel to his feet and gave him a message to deliver. A stunning portrait of God. In describing his call by God, Ezekiel groped for words. He portrayed a God of stunning grandeur, above and beyond our world. Yet, the supernatural God was inescapably near and real. He demanded complete obedience. Surprisingly, he appeared to Ezekiel in Babylon, the last place an Israelite expected to see him. But this God could not be locked in by national or geographical boxes. He ruled the earth. Ezekiel repeated this classic message over 60 times to quote, "Then they will know that I am the Lord." Now God said it when promising the destruction of Jerusalem in the first 24 chapters. He said it when predicting the downfall of Israel's neighbors in chapters 25 through 32. And after Jerusalem had fallen, God said it when promising a great future in the last 16 chapters. God did not want to remain vague or far off. He wanted people to know him. More, Ezekiel's God wanted to live with his people. He wanted to make his home in the center of the city. A strange book. Ezekiel had a reputation for strangeness, partly because of the unearthly visions with which his book begins and ends, and partly because Ezekiel acted out God's messages through some bizarre behavior. For instance, for months at a time, he lay in public on his side, bound by ropes, facing a clay model of Jerusalem. His message came in the most vivid form possible, meant to force people to pay attention. Ezekiel lived in perhaps the most tragic period of his people's existence. They had been tempting fate for generations, ignoring God's messages. And prophets like Micah, Amos or Amos, and Isaiah or Isaiah, who warned that if they didn't listen or they wouldn't listen to God, they would be destroyed. Finally, Babylonian armies swept through Judah, deporting large groups of citizens. Ezekiel had gone into exile into one of the first groups, as had Daniel. Ezekiel became God's messenger as a captive in Babylon. His voice blended in stereo with Jeremiah's, still in Jerusalem. Both prophets warned their people, who kept plotting ways to break free of Babylon, that the captives were going to be in Babylon for a long time. They predicted that Babylon's oppression would grow heavier. Jerusalem and the temple would be destroyed. Since Judah had ignored God's repeated warnings, God would use another means to get their attention. Suffering or through suffering. A new Jerusalem. Yet, even while punishing them, God's aim remained the same, to make himself known. God had warned Ezekiel that the Israelites were unlikely to listen, according to chapter 3, verse 7, even from captivity. They preferred idols to the living God or idols over the living God. Yet, Ezekiel's messages and dramas and visions continued to come year after year. It's as though God was saying through him, to quote, "Some way, someday, I will get through to them. If the message doesn't reach their hearts one way, I'll try another." Ezekiel ends with hope. The final chapters show a new Jerusalem or a new Jerusalem rising from the ruins of the old. The renewed city would never die, for it would be built on an unshifting reality. They will know, I'll quote, "They will know I am the Lord." The burning vision of God that Ezekiel had seen would become accessible to all. God would make himself at home there forever. Ezekiel's last verse says it all. To quote, "And the name of the city from that time on will be, the Lord is there." The special difficulty in reading Ezekiel is a dizzying variety of forms he used to get his message across. The book is a mix of visions, messages, dramas, and poems. But three remarkable visions of God bracket the package: beginning, middle, and end. Check on chapter 1, verse 1 up to chapter 3, verse 15, chapter 8, verses 1 to 6, and chapter 11, verses 16 to 25. Now, proceed to chapter 40, verses 1 to 4, and chapter 43, verses 1 to 9. And throughout, one line is repeated. To quote, "Then they will know that I am the Lord." So all of God's messages are meant to shock his people into restoring a living relationship with him. As you read Ezekiel, note down when each prophecy was made and its dominant image. Jerusalem as a prostitute, as a spreading grapevine, as a shaved head, and others. Now for insight into why Ezekiel sometimes acted out his message in a bizarre fashion, let's read the Living Parables. Now, if you use the same Bible that I have, the Daily Devotional Bible NIV by the Bible, it's on page 675. Now just check on yours, okay? Remember that the book of Ezekiel compresses messages God gave over 22 years. Now try to imagine the impact of his message on the people who first heard or saw it. Most of what Ezekiel said in Babylon concerned the dramatic military situation hundreds of miles away in Jerusalem. His message changed from doom to hope in chapter 33, and the turning point came with the news of Jerusalem's fall. You can get to know the historical situation by reading 2 Kings chapter 23 verse 36 to chapter 25, verse 12. Now, as mentioned in the other videos, a lineup of rulers, in my case, it's on page 338, check on yours. A lineup of rulers can help you place Ezekiel in Israel's history. A fascinating, though difficult study is the design of the renewed temple, which Ezekiel described in chapters 40 to 43. Now, a commentary on Ezekiel or a Bible dictionary and our Ezekiel or temple can help immensely in understanding these visions. Plans for reading Ezekiel. Plan 1, an overview of Ezekiel in 4 days. Day 1, read the introduction to Ezekiel and proceed to chapter 1, the majestic vision of a living God who appeared to Ezekiel. Day 2, read chapters 2 to 3, which tell how God called Ezekiel to deliver a difficult message. Alright? So day 2, chapters 2 to 3, which tell how God called Ezekiel to deliver a difficult message. Day 3, read chapter 4, one of the most dramatic of the enacted parables Ezekiel performed. Day 4, read chapter 37, a message of hope and resurrection for defeated people. For Plan 2, all of Ezekiel in 47 days. 1 chapter a day, except for day 2, wherein we read or you read chapters 2 and 3. Alright, that's why 48 chapters in 47 days. Okay, that's for Plan 2. So, just to recap, for Plan 1, an overview of Ezekiel in 4 days. Day 1, introduction, just like what we've read, and then proceed to chapter 1. Day 2, chapters 2 to 3. Day 3, chapter 4, and day 4, chapter 37. Now for Plan 2, 1 chapter a day except for day 2, wherein you read chapters 2 and 3. So, 48 chapters in 47 days. Alright, so that's all for now. God bless us all. you.